ND filters. Do we really need them for FPV HD footage? Well, that depends on your point of view, I guess, and what you're trying to get from the footage of your quad flying. So here's my guide to ND or neutral density filters. I'm sure you've heard this description many times before, but basically ND filters are like sunglasses for your GoPro. They limit the amount of light that can get through to the camera sensor, but they don't change it in any way. A bit like turning down the volume, if you like. So why do we need them? Well, the whole thing about video and still images is getting the exposure right to get fantastic results. You don't want it too overexposed or blown out, or too underexposed with no detail in the shadows. This comes down to the aperture setting, or how much light gets into the camera sensor, the shutter speed, or how fast the image is captured, and the ISO setting, or how light sensitive the camera sensor is. And these three things need to be adjusted to get a properly exposed image or video. And each setting has a different primary and secondary effect on the result. Aperture affects depth of field, or how deep the focus range is. ISO affects how grainy the images look, and the shutter speed affects how blurred an image is. To get the best image or video, you need to get the right combination of these settings, and it's a bit of a juggle. In photography, you'll find lots of references to the exposure triangle. And it's not geometry, it's just a common way to associate these three variables that you need to balance to get the best results. And best really means what's appropriate, or the end result that you're looking for. If you're really looking for a grainy result for some artistic reason, then you can deliberately dial up the ISO value, for example. If you're using a DSLR camera, you have complete control over all these settings. And there's auto modes to do some or all of the work for you. Now, there is another factor to add into the mix for video, and that's something called shutter angle. This originates from when movie cameras had real mechanical shutters, but these days is the same effect caused by the way the digital cameras capture and process the image off the sensor. And this is because there's a finite software processing time in here. Shutter angle is the relationship between the shutter speed and how many frames there are per second, frame rate. And it's a pretty complex issue because it determines how our eyes and brain process images to determine what looks right to us. If each frame of a video is ultra sharp and processed instantly, the end result looks like some CGI or animation, and it just doesn't look natural. We need a bit of motion blur on each frame to make it look more pleasing to the eye and real, more consumable by us basically. A good rule of thumb for shooting well-balanced video with natural motion blur is to aim for a shutter speed that is twice your frame rate, and this gives a very natural cinematic look. So if you set your frame rate to 30 frames a second, you'll need a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. There's loads of references out there that explain this in detail, and you'll even find Tom Cruise fighting the cause for turning off the image interpolation on your TV, because it totally screws all the hard work the cinematographers did to make movement in expensive movies look right. So what does this all mean for us using a GoPro on our quads? Well, it depends which GoPro you're using and what it allows you to adjust. The thing to remember about these action cams is that they're designed to capture fast sport action quickly and easily, so there's not much that you can really change, and the auto setting software in here tends to favour shutter speed to capture sharp high speed footage and give a wow factor. Regardless of your camera, whether it's a Hero 4, 5, 6 or 7, the only thing you have real control over is the frame rate. And these cameras are all fixed aperture, so you can't change that. And it may look like you can change shutter speed and ISO settings on some of them, but in fact you're only setting the limits the auto exposure software can go to when it's doing its calculations. There's no manual settings, and they continually change their values to capture what it thinks is the best image. So if we want a more cinematic look to our HD footage, we need to fool the camera software into thinking there's less light reaching the sensor, forcing it to decrease or slow down the shutter speed, and that introduces some motion blur. Remember, the more light there is, a sunny bright day or snow on the ground, the auto exposure software will increase the shutter speed to stop the image being all overexposed and blown out. Confused? I'm not surprised, because it's actually a pretty complex subject. But the good news is we don't have to do very much to get great results that look more natural and cinematic. By just strapping an ND filter like this one on the front of your GoPro, you're causing the auto exposure software in the camera to decrease the shutter speed or make it slower. So the shutter is effectively open for longer. It'll be correctly exposed, and because it's open for longer, you'll get some motion blur. Now, there's some nonsense that I've seen out there that you can use ND filters like this to remove jello. This is confusing because if you're getting vibration in your camera for whatever reason, ND filters don't remove it. All that's happening is the small vibrations are being hidden by the motion blur. It's like a side effect, really. ND filters like this kit from Camkix comes in 4 grades: ND2, ND4, ND8 and ND16. ND2 is like a lightly smoked set of sunglasses, and ND16 is pretty dark. And these numbers are the number of stops or exposure values the filter allows you to correct the exposure by. ND2 is 1 stop, ND4 is 2 stops, and so on. This kit comes with a cleaning cloth and some pouches and a clip to mount the filters to the front of your Session 4 or 5. It's really good value for money, and I've been using it for ages. And you could spend a huge amount on ND filters. If you've got a DSLR camera, a single ND filter can cost you silly money. What you're really paying for in that case is how neutral the filter is and how optically perfect it is. But you're going to crash your quads lots, so don't go spending a load on ND filters that you're just going to break. These Camkix ones are about £10 on Amazon, and they'll also protect your camera screen to some extent. I've seen people trying to use car window film stuck on the camera screen. This may be a cheap solution, but it won't work that well. You'll end up with bubbles in the film, which you'll see as blurry spots in the video, and it's not a neutral density filter. In fact, you've got no idea what it is. Choosing which ND filter to use is a bit of guesswork and experience. If you go too dark, like an ND16 on an overcast day or at dawn or dusk, you'll end up with too much motion blur and probably very dark footage, because the camera exposure software will have reached its limit. The easiest way to check which one to use is to clip the filter to the camera and view the live image on the app to see what it looks like. You'll need to experiment a bit to get the best settings. I find an ND2 filter at dusk and dawn with smooth flowing flying gets great results, and most sunny days I strap on an ND8 or an ND16 and tweak depending on how bright it is. So how are we going to fit these filters to our GoPro? This little clip on the Camkix kit isn't going to work. It'll easily fall off and you're just going to lose it. So I've designed some 3D printed Tpu mounts that hold the GoPro Session and the filter securely in place. You just need to slide the filter into the front of the mount, and the GoPro will snugly press in and hold everything in place. And if you want, you can even take the filter out and the mount is still pretty tight and the GoPro won't fall out. I've had quite a few hard landings, and to be honest, it's been fine. These mounts with the ND filter option are available on the Xcopter site. There's specific ones for the Hawk 5, the Reverb, like this one, and others, as well as these generic mounts, which you can pretty much zip tie to any frame. And I'll leave links in the description below to all the items. Also, I really recommend you check out references to ND filters and the exposure triangle on all the photography sites that are out there. They have really good detailed explanations of how it all works. And although it's not directly relevant to action cam video, it's a good backgrounder on understanding the theory. I hope you found that useful. I'll leave you with some footage shot with a Hero 5 and various ND filters. And remember to like and subscribe to the channel for updates. It really does help me make better content. I'll see you next time.